The rain had been falling in sheets when I had entered the loft, but upon my exit there was only a fine, snowy mist, made icy by the bitter cold. That was the first reason why I found myself in my current predicament. The cold had caused almost every surface to become slick. This created nowhere to place my feet that I could trust, and no handholds that were a sure thing either. I had entered on the north side of the loft, through a window that was carelessly left ajar. It only took me a few minutes to sneak through the place, searching for valuable items as I went. Luckily for me, it had been unoccupied, which made my job much easier. I didn't want to exit out the way I came in. It was a risk entering there in the first place. The hallway outside had been lighted by many brightly glowing sconces of luminous lichen, commonly used to light the walkways and streets. In the wealthier areas of Salgaunt, exiting there would only add to the chances that I would be seen. Instead, I had chosen the south side window, which I had been sure was a good exit point when I was casing the place just hours before. Now I was not so sure, for upon exiting through the window, stepping down onto the icy ledge just beneath the window sill turned out to be a bad idea, for I slipped on the surface of the ledge and only just managed to grab the edge of it as I had fallen. Thankfully, I had a very valuable pair of gloves, enchanted by magical means, that gave me greatly increased hand strength and the ability to grip surfaces much more readily than if they were just ordinary gloves. This didn't prevent me from the danger though. Being able to hold onto the ledge for a longer stretch of time didn't solve the issue, for I was still hanging. I had attempted to pull myself up using my arms twice, only to find that there was nowhere to pull myself to. There were no footholds I could reach, and no way to swing myself to any safe landing either. I had a few scrolls in my pack that would have saved me, but I couldn't reach them, and even if I could have, unrolling the parchments and reciting the incantations therein wouldn't have been possible. No, I was pretty certain that I was going to have to fall, and that was my main issue, for it was a drop of over 3 stories, straight down, onto cobbled streets below. If the fall didn't kill me, it would surely break both my legs, or any number of bones, depending on how I landed. I was sure that I didn't want to have no legs, for it was a sure bet that I would be arrested by the scepters if they came upon me there. And even if, somehow, I managed to be able to move after the fall, and drag myself somewhere, the likely outcome was arrest or death. The city of Salgaunt did not favor thieves, and I would most likely be given a severe punishment, and a long prison sentence. By severe, that would mean having my hands chopped off by an axe, or maybe one hand, or possibly a number of fingers. I would rather have died than face anything even close to that. So, I decided to do what I must, then and there, so at least I would still have some kind of control over my fate. I decided that I would let go, and while doing so, push off the wall in front of me, so that my body would rotate forward in midair, and spin heels overhead, so that I would land full on my cranium. This would, hopefully, give me a swift death, God's willing. I prayed to Tamora, the goddess of good fortune, to grant me good luck in that regard, for having a broken neck and living through the fall would be an even worse outcome than the ones I feared already. Now, in my experience, having an inkling to do something, or the willingness to take action, especially when it meant putting oneself into painful or life-threatening situations, and doubly so when the pain or death was a sure thing, was far different from actually taking the action and committing to the outcome that resulted from it. I don't know if it was fortunate or not that I had very little time left to ponder it. My hands, despite my magically enchanted gloves, were dangerously close to failing and losing my grip, which would not be ideal, and would leave me far less control of the manner in which I'd strike the street beneath me. So, without further delay, and with silent apologies to my few friends and loved ones I still had, along with a quick prayer to whichever gods were listening, I clenched my teeth, put my feet up against the wall, and let go, pushing from the wall with as much force as I could. I created the proper force to cause my feet to swing up and out behind me, and my head to swing down like a top-heavy hammer. I was pleased, if one could say that, to find that my judgment of how much force was needed to accomplish this was accurate. I saw the ground rushing towards me, barely having enough time to register another thought before the end. Time didn't slow down like I had experienced when I'd been sure of death in previous times over my life. Not this time. I merely had time to close my eyes and let my muscles relax, which I was surprisingly successful at doing. And then, all I saw was black.
God's damn this rain, I cursed. Under my breath, I was soaked to the bone. my cloak doing little to stave out the heavy droplets of water as the torrent poured down on me. I couldn't believe how much rain was falling, because normally, rain was a blessing in my line of work, that of a professional thief. Thieves always praised the rain, as it was both sound and visual cover for those like me. But this downpour was so much that it was only hindering me. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything else around me, aside from the loud noise made by the sheets of water that were being blown all willy-nilly by the strongest gusts of wind I can ever recall. There was nobody out in this weather, aside from those who had nowhere else to go. The shelters were full, and the city watch, also known as the Scepters, made sure to give the homeless population nowhere to go. Homelessness was treated like an infectious disease in Selgot. The Scepters were more likely to jail you than help you if you were a beggar or a bum. Panhandling and begging were detestable actions. If one was a Sembite, doubly so if they were a Sembite from Selgot. Needless to say, I was one of the only people out on the streets who wasn't the city watch. And as a matter of fact, the Scepters were out in abundance. I had spotted 3 of them at different intervals upon my route, which was more than I would usually see, even if the weather was clear. I said a prayer to Mask, the god of shadows and thieves, for stealth and so that nobody would notice me. As I slunk through the rain-soaked streets, my employer, a mage named Praeus Ver, had given me a difficult task. It hadn't seemed that way at first, considering Master Ver used a scrying stone to pinpoint the location of the item he wished for me to retrieve. But then, when I had gone to retrieve the aforementioned item, it turned out to be absent, hidden too well for me to find, or not existent at all. This had occurred 3 times in a row. 3 nights, 3 failures. So, suffice it to say, I was sloshing through the storm, only begrudgingly. For you see, you probably don't know enough about me as a person to know, I hate failure. If there are times where I fail at a task, I have this compulsion to see it through, and go back if I must, to complete the task with a success, and until I do, the compulsion remains. Believe you me, this issue has landed me in trouble, more times than I'd like to admit, and if we're talking of trouble, I was going through a lot of trouble to procure this damned item, the one I'd been sent out in the night to get. I didn't know much about it, nor did I really care. While magical items were of interest to me, they only held interest if they were valuable to me in a monetary sense. If it wasn't worth coin, I didn't usually want to mess with it. Magical items were, and are, trouble, in a whole new meaning of the word. This item, a spherical orb, Master Ver had said, black at a glance, but upon further scrutiny, opaque, was the size of a small stone, perfectly round, and would likely be sitting upon some sort of stand. I wasn't to touch it, even if I had gloves on, and Master Ver had made that extremely clear, even making me repeat back to him 5 or 6 times, don't touch it, even with gloves on, again and again, don't touch it, even with gloves on. I may have been less than truthful with you, the reader, moments ago. Let me apologize now, and we can have that part out of the way, for when I said I didn't care what the item was, that was not entirely true. I did care, but not because I thought it would be worth any kind of coin. No, rather, I was interested in the reasons why Master Ver was so implicit about me not touching it. He had even given me a special bag, protected with numerous wards I watched him cast upon it, and in addition to that, he gave me a pair of strange-looking tongs, with which to pick up the sphere. Now, I try not to be overly curious about things, especially when the information isn't offered freely, but in this case, I was more than a little curious. What would occur were I to touch the sphere? What manner of sorcery would befall me? Would it kill me? Would it be safe even if I used the tongs and the bag? Would the action of picking it up cause untold fuckery to ensue? These were all questions I asked Master Ver, but the only reply he gave was that it was a very powerful magical item, and nobody should touch it, ever, and that even he wouldn't touch it if he could help it. That had been good enough of an answer for me at the time, but now that I was actively in the field, seeking the item, clandestine to interact with it eventually, now I was concerned. More than a little concerned, in fact. A very powerful magical item, Ver had said, and when he spoke those words, I could feel his earnestness. A particularly loud clap of thunder exploded, seemingly right above my head at that moment, jarring me from my thoughts. I was approaching the location where Master Ver's scrying attempts had said to go, a high-rise loft on the corner of San Street and 7th Avenue. I came up 7th, through a narrow alleyway, automatically going into a sort of stealth mode, which comes from many years of experience as a thief. It was second nature for me to blend into my surroundings, and over the years I'd become very good at it. I approached the intersection of 7th and San, crouching down behind a hogshead, resting my gloved hand upon it and paused, watching and listening. I had to use my eyes more than my ears, due to the storm, and I allowed them to defocus, using a technique an old assassin I knew many years before had taught me. He called it soft eyes, and it was a very effective technique used for surveying a large area or one's surroundings, quickly and effectively, allowing my eyes to defocus, and panning my vision from left to right slowly. I allowed my visual cortex to pick up on movement and color differences, mainly shadows and light, contrasting in my defocused gaze, rather than any single object or target that one would naturally single out while looking around in a mundane fashion. Everything appeared to be as it should. The district of Selgont I was in didn't have an official name, but San Street was the running title, for that was the street where many nobles, debutantes, and other wealthy elite, so to speak, lived. It was very near to the Hewlan's palace, his royal hunting grounds basically flush to the edge of the street itself. It was a very posh, very clean and well-to-do area. Nobody was about, or so I initially thought, just as I was about to make my move towards the second level of the pathways that snaked up, and above me, I heard something. I couldn't detect immediately the direction from whence the sound had come, nor could I very easily discern what the sound even was, but I knew for certain I'd heard something. I looked about, quickly trying to find the source of the sound, and then heard it again, louder this time, from above me, the sound of a person, a woman, gasping or grunting. I looked upwards into the storm, rain hitting me in the face full force, stinging my eyes. At first I couldn't quite see what it was that was moving about up there, high up, 3 or so levels above the ground where I was crouched, but the rain let up a touch just at that moment, and what I saw became clear as crystal. Now, I've seen my fair share of beautiful women in my day, and have had a goodly number of those women in my bed, and I've seen some of the most exquisite legs, rumps, breasts, and everything in between, and I appreciated every last one of those beautiful works of living art. So, when I say that what I saw, hanging by her arms from a window ledge, was a woman with the most exquisite, shapely, perfectly proportioned, toned, ravishingly alluring rump and thighs, and indeed entire body, I had ever seen. Do not take me lightly. I was immediately hit with a pang of sorrow, as I could see right away that her situation was going to result in a long fall, probably to her death. I almost cried aloud, but professional habit stayed my tongue, almost in a panic, professionalism keeping me under control, but only just. I racked my brain as to what I was going to do to save this woman from imminent death. I felt I had no choice. I could hardly let a creature of such beauty fall to her death without trying to do something to prevent it. I entertained the idea of trying to use my rope and grapple somehow, maybe creating a makeshift pulley by throwing the grapple over the nearest crossways being to the lass, but I dismissed that quickly as unrealistic. I then thought about running up to the 3rd level and using a little parkour to possibly get close enough to give her my hand, but there was no time for that. Then it hit me. I remembered that I had a number of spell scrolls in my pack, 2 scrolls of invisibility, and one of the spell, float. The float spell was mainly used when one couldn't cross an area by jumping, or swinging, or otherwise traversing it. It was cast on oneself, or one target of the caster's choice, and would levitate the target of the spell roughly 3 feet vertically, and perhaps a rock toss horizontally, depending on if the target of the spell was intent on a direction. It had a spell life of about 8 seconds, enough time to cross a narrow chasm, or traverse a deep stream where the bridge had been destroyed. I had no idea if it would cease someone from falling, but the mechanics of the spell itself were such that it ought to work. I had no time to ponder that just then, for as I unrolled the scroll, preparing to recite the incantation written upon it, in arcane script, with silver ink, just then, I saw the woman's grip give way. As quickly as I could, I began to speak the arcane stanza written there, and just as I thought it would be too late, I succeeded at the casting. The scroll crumbled to dust in my hands, and focusing on the lass, I willed the spell to find her and stop the fall as best I could.
There are only a few things in my life I'd like to forget. The first was when my father lay dying on his deathbed, stricken with the blackroot fever, as it was called, named after the blackroot tree, which was harmless by itself. But when the sap from that tree was made into glue, often used by tailors, shoemakers, tanners, and the like, the process causes a release of a phytotoxin that is absorbed by the body through the skin, lungs, and eyes. Over time, the creation of this resin causes liver failure, heart failure, and bouts of horrendous coughing, ripping the lining from the lungs, eventually also leading to the erosion of the stomach lining through episodes of terrible nausea. Having to watch and be basically helpless to save or even comfort my father was almost too much for me to bear. The memory of it haunts me, watching him hack blood up from his lungs, the wash leaking from his mouth and nose, until his eyes turned red from straining to breathe. The months of agony as he begged for me to take his life, and got very angry with me when I couldn't do it. He died that way, full of rage at me, even until the end. The memory of it haunts me every day. The second thing I wish I could forget was when I was raped by a trio of rogues, pirates from the Sword Coast. One night, after a long day of working as a barmaid at the Bug's Tusk Tavern in Calamshan, when I was abroad on a trip to see some of the world I had always wanted to see. My trip to Calamshan had turned into an extended stay there, having fallen in love with the culture of the people of Calimport, and I was truly considering staying there for good. But then, that fateful night, I was heading towards my loft on a cold, quiet night after work, and the three scallywags cornered me, one of them sneaking up behind me and rendering me unconscious with a hard blow to the back of my head. When I woke up, I was being violated in the most horrendous fashion. One of them was inside me from the front, and the other from the back, and the third was playing with himself and slapping my breasts and face. If I were to cry out, it was extremely painful, but the worst part was when they spent inside of me, and on my face and naked chest, degrading me like some object of sexual gratification. They then beat me to within an inch of my life and left me for dead. After what I can only guess to be a number of hours, I was discovered by a passerby who heard me groan from inside a shed. He saved my life by taking me to the temple of Tamora, his chosen deity, and praying with the priests of Tamora there to heal me and bring me back to life. Tamora favored me and healed me of my physical wounds completely, though the mental ones still remain. I never truly recovered from that experience, and I came back to Sembia a different woman and never spoke of it again. Until now, as I impart upon you fine readers a little of my dark history. Why these thoughts and memories came to me as I fell to my death, I can only assume was to get them into the open and process them as best I could before heading to the afterlife. The ground came rushing up to meet my face, and in that last moment, I accepted death and took my last breath, awaiting the death to come. But it never came. That much is obvious. When I realized I was still holding my breath, I gasped reflexively, opening my eyes to see the ground before me, only a foot or so from my face. I had hardly the time to register the reality before me, and had just begun to ponder what in the hells was going on, when I suddenly plummeted, that final foot banging my chin on the ground, the rest of my body slumping over me like wet sheets fallen from a hamper. The very next thing I heard was decidedly pleasant laughter. It was the laugh of a man, I knew for certain, but just who and why, I wasn't sure, and honestly, I was in too much shock to try and figure any of that out. Rubbing my chin, I sat up in the puddle I'd landed in, the storm still raging all about me. I looked towards the sound of the laughter, to see a man there, standing with his hands over his face, leaning back in what I was guessing could have been relief. A cloak of black cloth was draped over his shoulders, with a cowl of the same cloth over his head. It was difficult to see anything else through the rain and dim light. He was laughing through his hands.
"Oh, thank the gods. Thank you all so much. You are wonderful,"
said he, taking his hands from his face now, and as I viewed him then, I saw one of the most beautiful creatures I'd ever seen before. I know it seems strange to say that about a man, for he was a man. And oh, what a man he was. He was tall and slender, but fit, and one could see a finely sculpted musculature beneath his leather armor. His face was lean, but not overly so, and he had a fine jawline, and very well-kept facial hair shaved into a very finely done goatee. He had startlingly, deeply toned blue-green eyes that shone through the night like two orbs of jade. His teeth were perfectly straight and white, and his style and manner of dress was decidedly utilitarian, yet very sleek and stylish in its own fashion, and was very attractive as a complete getup. He wore a very deadly-looking saber on his left hip, and a series of daggers strapped to his chest, and something told me he knew how to use them very well. He had a cloak of black cloth, which hung down to the small of his back, and a cowl of the same black cloth was over his head, his gloved hands over his face, and he seemed to be laughing through them. I spoke then softly. "What happened?" I asked.
What happened? What happened is, it worked, the spell of float. It actually worked. You as good as dead, miss. I've never been so relieved in all my life.
And he then came trotting over to me, extending his hand in a gesture to help me to my feet. I took his hand, and was immediately impressed with his grace as he helped me to my feet, supporting me with a strength that was absolutely sure to have me should I fall, yet allowing me to keep my own dignity by letting me stand under my own power. He then put a hand to my jaw, cradling it gently, examining my chin with his beautiful eyes. He breathed a short sigh, and nodded.
It's nothing, that won't even leave a scar. I'm very glad to see you alive. Miss, just extremely thankful I didn't have to see what might have happened. You are so beautiful, it would have been a true tragedy.
The expression of honest caring on his features made me double take, and I was a little bit taken aback, for it was genuine. I could plainly see that. It was a strange sensation, the feelings I felt in my chest. I wasn't used to them.
What is your name? I'm Denner Voss, at your service, ma'am.
And he nodded, making steady eye contact. With that caring, regal nature he seemed to have naturally. I felt myself blush. "I'm OWLIE," I said. "Thank you for saving my life, though how you did so is still confusing me." He began to glance around as we conversed, his jade orbs moving smoothly from one point to another, then back to me.
I can explain it as we go, OWLIE, but we'd better get off the street. The scepters are out in spades tonight. Come, follow me. I have a safe place to go.
I hesitated. The man had just saved my life. That was true. But I wasn't very good at trusting people in general, and men least of all. For reasons I've said before, he must have seen the look on my face, for he said,
Look, we don't have much time. I can tell you, this place isn't a good place to stay in the open. Just let us at least get off the street. Then you can decide what you want to do. I know a good place to do just that. Right here behind these lofts.
I figured, if he'd wanted to hurt me, he could have easily done so already. And there was just something about his eyes, the earnestness. I decided to let him lead us to safety. "All right, Mr. Voss, let's go. I'll follow you."
Please, call me Denner.
And he turned on a heel and began to move off into the shadows nearby. I followed him closely as we vaulted a fence, moving through a narrow breezeway, over another shorter fence, and out past 7th Avenue, on a small, very hidden landing. I glanced around. On 3 of the 4 sides, the landing was enclosed by the tall houses on each side, a blank, white wall of stone, stopping all traffic in each of those directions. On the 4th side, the south side, was an access ladder. Beyond that was an open area of about a bow shot, then more tall houses off in the distance. It was like being in an encapsulated eagle's nest. We had entered from a narrow fissure-like corridor on the northern side of the landing. That had come from the street we had been on just prior. To find this place, one would have had to have been either a city worker, the builder and designer of such a place, or a very thorough and meticulous rogue, like the one I was now in company with. In the center of the landing was a round manhole cover of iron with a handle on the top side, near one edge of it. Embossed in the surface of the cover, in common, were the words access number 17. I could only assume that the manhole led to an access tunnel, likely sewage or waste tunnels, though I was hoping it was not the sewers. I hate anything to do with waste, especially human waste. It disgusts me. Denner crouched down and took hold of the manhole cover, grunting with effort as he opened it. The door let out a shrill squeak, a grating sound. It was very loud, though brief. I grimaced at the noise, glancing around reflexively.
Don't worry, OWLIE,
said Denner then.
Even if someone heard that, there is no way anyone would be able to tell where it came from, much less find this place. Come on, down we go.
Reluctantly, I followed Denner down the ladder just beyond the manhole door. I closed the cover behind us, with a little effort, though it seemed as though it was easier to close it than it was to open. We traveled down the ladder for quite some time, and when we'd reached the bottom, I looked up and saw that I could no longer see the top.
These are the old access tunnels, from the days when Selgaunt was called Chancel Gaunt, when it was ruled by King Selgar. Long ago, they are seldom used now, and no longer act as the sewage system. They are just ruins now,
said Denner, matter-of-factly. I see, said I, with a nod. Well, I'm thankful for that. I can't abide waste. It's putrid and foul. I have enough foulness to deal with on a normal day. Glad there isn't any extra. I smiled softly.
While these tunnels are hidden, they are not altogether safe. We should really keep moving. There are a number of things down here which live, and could possibly prevent us from doing the same. There are also a number of thieves' guilds in this city, which make their homes way down here in these ruined tunnels. I wouldn't really want to come across any scouts from those gangs, though. It's possible I know some of them personally. I haven't exactly made friends with too many other thieves here in Selgaunt, being a freelancer and all.
Seeing no other option, I figured I might as well just go with him, and I nodded. You mentioned a safe place, I said. Take us to that place, Denner.
Very well, OWLIE, and I like the way you say my name. It rolls right off your tongue.
And he smirked sidelong at me, then moved off down the tunnels. I followed him, keeping my watchful eyes about me, hoping that I wasn't making a mistake.